Hello, everyone. What's going on? My name is Timpedia, and welcome to my 27th birthday top 10 list. I've been doing these for the past few years, and it's time to tackle my 2018 birthday list. And since I just 2 days ago recorded my podcast review of The Last Jedi, I decided that I wanted to do a list about Star Wars, just about Star Wars this year. And the only thing I could think of that I felt really serious about and sincere about was I wanted to talk about what The Last Jedi, more than any other Star Wars movie since Episode 7, has made me miss from the old Star Wars expanded universe. So that's what this list is. I'm going to go through 10 things that I just feel are worth talking about that I miss more than ever from the old expanded universe after having seen The Last Jedi. You know, it kind of applies to Rogue One, but also much more applies to Force Awakens. But The Last Jedi is what really brought it home for me. So let's talk about the top 10 things The Last Jedi made me miss from the old expanded universe. Now, this list is in no particular order. This is just the list in the order that I came up with them while I was staring at my shelf full of all the old Star Wars books. But I guess you could say this is the item on the list that made me want to do this video more than anything else. And that is Mara Jade Skywalker. Now, I know there are characters from the old expanded universe who matter to a lot of people, and they all are valid. Darth Bane, Thrawn, they've both been brought into the new expanded universe through things like the Rebels series, and I think Bane is mentioned in like the Clone Wars or something. Doesn't really matter, though. We, having seen The Last Jedi, basically can confirm that there is no Mara Jade. If she's in the new expanded universe, she certainly can never have this development alongside Luke. She never becomes Mara Jade Skywalker. And that is one of the biggest casualties in my mind. Kind of the idea of this whole list is I thought about Mara Jade after I was, reviewing the movie Last Jedi, and I realized, wow, there are some things that I miss dearly from the old expanded universe. Mara Jade was such an interesting character, going from being the Emperor's like raised almost child, a Emperor's hand, to picking herself back up after his death, the whole Thrawn incident with Joruus C'baoth, or Joruus, I can't remember how to pronounce his name. I've never really heard it, so. And then her working with Talon Karrde and the Hand of Thrawn duology, and then her and Luke together. I still love reading Survivor's Quest, the only book that actually directly features like Luke and Mara almost alone looking for Outbound Flight. It's just such a cool thing to watch the two of them interact together once they're close, and watch them deal with problems together. And it's just them. There's like no Republic behind them. They're just on this ship with some people, and they're Chiss and human. And it's such a fun story. And then her development as she becomes a mom and an aunt to the Solo children, and then eventually the whole events of Legacy of the Force and how she deals with the Yuzhong Vong invasion. There's so much there, and it is such a loss to Star Wars in my mind to not have her be a character anymore. I don't. It's a spoiler to call her Mara Jade Skywalker, but it's one of those things where it's more about the journey, because she was so about the journey. There was no just calling her Mara Jade Skywalker, knowing she was a Jedi Master married to Luke. It doesn't encompass even a fraction of what her character was and what she represented in Star Wars. As outside of Leia, she was probably, if not definitely, the most beloved female character. So, yeah, there's plenty more on this list, but this is the entry that I wanted to have first because it kind of started this list in my mind. So, number one thing I'm missing now from after having seen Last Jedi is Mara Jade. For the second entry on the list, it's kind of cheating because I already mentioned it in the first entry, but I actually wanted to say that another thing that I really missed from the old expanded universe was the Yuzhong Vong. I know I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. I know how everybody pronounces most of the words like this differently, but I always missed these guys ever since the war ended. I know that it's the war with them is like one of the longest straight running series in history. It's certainly the longest straight series in Star Wars. The New Jedi Order is like, what, 25-ish books, I think? But the awesome thing about having a completely alien race is that it really changes the dynamic. There's not nearly as much emphasis, I guess is a better way to put it, on ideological differences. That those are kind of the undercurrent, and just like they are with the rebellion and the empire and that kind of thing, but it's much less in your face about it. This is really a story for survival. It's not even like a zombie thing, like is so popular these days. No, these aliens who have super weird technology, which is super fascinating, are literally coming to completely colonize and probably exterminate everyone else in the galaxy. And they're doing well. Like, that's the crazy thing. There's been other stories like this in Star Wars, but they never come this close. Coruscant Falls, one of my favorite series out of all of New Jedi Order, is I can't remember the name of it, but the 2-book series immediately following it, when it's kind of Rogue Squadron-y again, is very fun. But the whole alien feel, they can't feel the Force as we do. The Jedi have to learn how to handle it, and they hate the Jedi and they want to hunt them. But there's also the shame cast and everything. It's such an awesome dichotomy. And then when you see The Last Jedi and Force Awakens, it's just the Empire and the Rebellion again. And it's like, what was the point of making them new factions? What was the point, other than the fact that Luke, Han, and Leia are older now, what was the point of doing this all again? It's like, let's just tell the same story with our own personal take on it. Whereas in the books, the old stories, the war did go on for a long time. So it was all part of this overwhelming war that you already knew what was going on. And then you had these aliens who were like, no, we're just totally different. So for that reason, I really miss, compared to, I would definitely take the Yuzhong Vong War over any First Order and Resistance ever. In my efforts to combine this list and kind of make everything relatable, this is kind of touching on changes that happened during the New Jedi Order. And it speaks directly to that title of the series, The New Jedi Order. And by that I mean the third entry on this list is the Jedi lore that we lost with the loss of the old expanded universe. Now, obviously, this is a little cheating because there just was so much built up from so many books and games and sources and things like that. But I really grew to know and enjoy I don't want to call it the philosophy of the Jedi, but the history of the Jedi was so fascinating. How this order endured for like 25,000 years after starting on Tython, and how lightsaber technology evolved, and the rises and falls, like the Ruusan reformations is such a fascinating thing. The Jedi Civil War and KOTOR. All of these ebbs and flows of the Jedi is so fascinating, and it feels like such a slap in the face because there have been times where the Jedi are in danger before, where the Jedi are really hunted. Like in KOTOR 2, there's almost no Jedi left. But The Last Jedi is like if you took those scenarios, but then you had it be about how that last Jedi gave up and didn't want to be a Jedi anymore. It feels like, as much as we talked about this on our podcast review, but the Jedi is so much more than an establishment. For better or worse, the Jedi are seen as the good Force users, or the Force establishment, usually for good in the galaxy. And you feel such an attachment with that word. And for Luke to spend so much of the Last Jedi talking about how the Jedi should be gone, when we had in the books how Luke wanted to reform the Jedi and give them this more not galactic police force feel, but just kind of almost do-gooders, but like spectator do-gooders who wanted to work on a more micro level and not sway the hand of like the Galactic Alliance and things like that, like be somewhat influential, but not go back to when the Jedi like ran the Republic or anything like that before the Ruusan reformations. It just feels like so much progress with the Jedi has been lost by getting rid of this. Now, I recognize that this and potentially some of the other points I'm going to raise, not all of them, but some of the points I'm going to raise are kind of probably touched on in some of the new books maybe, or things that might not have come out as of this recording, or Clone Wars, or Rebels. I'm sure that there is stuff touched on in there. Like my friend Luigi mentioned that Force Ghost creation is touched on in Rebels. And that is so weird to me because that seems like a mystery I don't want to have answered. Like, he's like, yeah, in Rebels they spend 3 episodes figuring out how you make a Force Ghost. Out of all the things, out of all the lore of the Jedi, out of all the Force powers, out of all the things that people did in history, you wanted to focus on relearning or on learning how to do a Force Ghost? Really? I don't know. For me, it just feels like we lost so much losing the awesome old lore and styling of the Jedi that existed before, and that's I miss the old Jedi. I really do. Number 4 on our list is kind of another cheat as well, and I kind of mentioned it as I'm trying to take a train through all these. I miss the sense of age and permanence that came with the Old Republic. I know that this is cheating because a lot of people have said, well, BioWare's still doing the Old Republic MMO as of right now. Disney has never really said, yes, for sure, the old stuff is no longer canon. I remember having this discussion a lot when Disney first made their announcement a few years ago about the old canon going away. Or I should say the old expanded universe. But I miss the certainty of the Old Republic. Now, nothing in Star Wars is perfect. It's not possible to create something so large, or even perfect creation is such a subjective thing. But I miss, like, in the new movies, there's this sense that nothing lasts very long. Like, the prequels I actually enjoy on some levels more than the newest movies because you felt like the Republic and the Jedi had some weight to them. And then in the newest movies, it's like, no, the rebellion and the Empire happened. The Empire lasted maybe 50-ish years. Probably, what am I saying, 50 years? It lasted about 20 years. And then the New Republic also lasts 20 years before Episode 8 when they just lose again. I miss this feeling of things having permanence. Like, even in the old expanded universe, even after the Empire is defeated, they sign a peace treaty and still exist. The Empire doesn't just go away, and under Gilad Paleon, they actually kind of turn into not perfect, but they kind of take those best aspects of the Empire, obviously get rid of the speciesism and sexism, and turn it actually into this really functional society, kind of like the Chiss, and it adds some kind of weight to it. It's a big deal in the New Jedi Order when the New Republic is dissolved and the Galactic Alliance is built from the ashes. And even then, the New Republic lasted from the Battle of Endor all the way up till that moment. And it was a new take on the Republic, but it still carried that weight of tradition, kind of. But the Resistance and the First Order is just clearly a new coat of paint on an old thing. And it somehow makes the old thing feel weak. Like it couldn't stand up on its own. I don't. It's hard to describe, but I hope maybe people who've read through the books and done similar things can understand what I'm talking about. When it feels like I miss the old I miss stories where, like the awesome thing about the Old Republic is you knew that it had time to it, but you saw this society that was built up over such a long time. No real society on Earth that's expanded more than, like, I'm sure there's something I'm not thinking of, but overall, when you think of the nations today, you can't really say that they've survived in their kind of current-ish form for even a fraction of the amount of time that the New Republic or the Old Republic lasted. And so the dissolution of the Republic for the Empire felt so weighty, and then the new movies just don't feel like they have any weight to them because it's just I guess the galaxy is just going to be like this. Like, we should expect constant Empire, First Order, and Rebellion, Resistance. Like, is it just going to keep progressing? I know this isn't very much of a clear point, but I really do miss the Old Republic and the feeling that there was something established in the galaxy. Like, that there's also this isn't even actually a separate point, but there's this loss of sense of scale that I feel like the original trilogy had a lower sense of scale just because literally you couldn't make a movie like that. But then in the prequels, they show you lots of planets and big space battles and things like that. And then it feels like they wanted to railroad us back into the original trilogy style and just make it look better. But when you have the whole Resistance is on the Millennium Falcon at the end of Last Jedi, it feels like this should be impossible. I don't know. I'm going to go on to the next point because it ties in again, but I miss the sense of, this kind of ties in with the Yuzhong Vong and the Jedi and everything, but I miss the sense of a scale and longer lasting government and this thing that we're shooting for, I guess you could call it, this traditional ideal. And I miss that. I miss in the KOTOR games when you see the Republic thriving and being hit and everything. I miss all that. So anyway, let's go on to number 5 before I dig my hole deeper. We still have over half the list to go. Number 5 on this list is very much tied to our first point and even the actions that took place in Episode 7, actually, almost more than Episode 8. I miss the Skywalker line from the books. I can totally understand the desire to have a character, especially Rian Johnson. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name. Clearly doesn't like the Skywalker line. And that makes me sad because so much of the old expanded universe was tied to the Skywalkers, but it didn't like revolve around them, but they meant so much. The fact that Jaina and Jason have it's such a tale of brother and sister that's such a contrast to what Luke and Leia had, or the way Anakin Solo, his absolute rise and crushing death, or the way Luke and his one son drift apart but then get back together after Mara's death. It's such a more interesting story than just kind of emo Kylo. Like, everyone looks at emo Kylo and is like, oh, they kind of drew from Jason's story during Legacy of the Force and even before that near the end of New Jedi Order. But Jason had much more time invested in that story, and there was never a point. I don't want to talk about Luke too much, because if you want to hear me talk about Luke a lot, you should listen to my podcast review with 3 of my friends of The Last Jedi. But there was such a family connection that was just there in this story. Luke as the uncle to Leia and Han's kids, Luke's relationship to Han and Leia over the years, Ben Skywalker, like, all of this was so much more interesting than just Kylo. Kylo can't carry the weight of these major characters that I know he needs. He doesn't. It's cheating to say because he hasn't had the time yet. But we saw Han and Leia's kids from birth. Like, they were almost assassinated so many times, and the stuff that those kids went through to turn them into what they are today being the end of their story, I guess. Like, the Jaina being the sword of the Jedi, what does that mean? Jason's, like, weird gray Jedi journey almost into, from empathy into gray Jedi into dark side, almost Sith, into death at the hands of his own sister, or Anakin sacrificing himself to stop the Jedi killers, like, and then Ben's separation from his father, but then when his mother dies, they come back together so hard, and they grow and journey together near the end. It feels like such a loss compared to what Kylo seems to represent, which is just angsty teenager who, as much as they try to develop his character more, he really just lashes out and acts childish all the time. And Jason, you never got that impression. He was kind of angsty and wanted things his own way, but he could be so cold, and yet he still cared for Ben, and it was so much more layered and nuanced. It just felt like I miss the Solo and Skywalker families, I guess I should say. I miss our heroes getting to have something. Like, they all got to have their children, and then for basically 2 of them one to be lost and the other to step away and have to be killed is just so more gut-wrenching. And then you throw, like, Chewie into the mix with the life debt with the kids and him saving Anakin, basically being part of the family, versus Chewie, who just kind of shoots Kylo once after he kills Han. I'm trying not to talk about The Last Jedi too much, but man, I miss these families. I miss having a central thing to kind of rotate around instead of just shifting all the time, but having lots of. It's not to say that there was a small condensed cast in the books, but in the books you could see these progressions, whereas we've just completely discarded the old for the new in the movies, and it just, I don't know. I miss the children, really. That's the best way to put it.